Thank you all, glad to be here. I am suffering with a cold, so I will try to make it through. In fact, if I all of a sudden start talking and dash off, it's because I literally can't talk anymore. This is a really short session and the last thing before lunch, but it is covering some pretty big points that we need everyone to be aware of as we're going through here. As Jaime said, I'm head of engineering for Jack Henry. I work directly with the DevRel teams, the cloud native infrastructure teams, and the enterprise architecture teams. And then I end up working with almost all the product groups at Jack Henry as part of that. So I get to do a lot of really fun stuff. I talked a little bit about in the welcome, just as kind of a history lesson for Jack Henry, we've had APIs available for a really long time. All the way back in 2005, JExchange, which was our first major API that went live. Our first major integrator went live in 2006. And there's a tremendous amount of integration built on top of that API alone. And then we continued to iterate. SimExchange was the second iteration of integration options for the Scimitar platform, and it went live right around 2015. Banno's digital toolkit was always API first, but we first started publicly exposing APIs around 2019. And the Jack Henry platform that we spent so much time in these last 2 days talking about started going live in 2024. So when we first published JExchange, think more than 20 years ago, the state of the world, it was a very different place. And security around banking APIs was even more scrutinized. And there was a big worry about it. So initially, JExchange was only available over private connections. So you had to utilize our JConnect VPN network that Jack Henry maintains for all of our financial institutions, or as an integrator, you had to have a private data connection to our data centers to be able to use it. There was no public internet access at all. However, for those of us building public internet-facing applications, that's not very fun. So quite a while ago, we started exposing JExchange to the public internet. And we've continued to build upon that. At first, we limited what messages you could call through it over the public internet, and then slowly we've started removing more and more of those restrictions. And so now the full breadth of all of JExchange is available on the public internet. And it uses IP allow lists to control who can connect to those. So we have to maintain those. The challenge is the internet is not what it was originally, and the world has changed. So the problem with JExchange's API security right now is it's just a protocol. It's all username and password based, and that makes it very vulnerable to brute force attacks. JExchange not as much, although we have seen some, but also specifically against online banking APIs, the Banno APIs, the level of brute force attacks that we see against those API surface areas is mind-blowing. We talk to major providers like even the major cloud providers, and they are blown away by the scale of attack we see. And JExchange is a highly privileged API. So the idea that it could be brute force guessed on a username and password alone is pretty scary. In addition, the more integrators we add, and we have tens of thousands of integration points to JExchange, the wider those IPs that we allow, the wider the attack surface area is getting, because we keep adding and adding more and more IP addresses. Not only is that hard on us to maintain and keep those up to date, but the effectiveness diminishes dramatically the more and more we have. So it's just no longer a good security posture. And lastly, and probably most importantly, federal regulators have flat out said, you can't do this anymore. Everyone's going to ask me, hey, can you point us to documentation where they said that? No, I can't. It's private. They don't publish it. They just tell us no. And so you're just going to have to trust me. They said no. So we have to move on and move beyond that. So instead, even for our SOAP-based protocols, we are going to switch to an OAuth 2 authentication method. And the benefits here are pretty clear. Instead of a static username and password, you have shorter-lived access tokens that are rotating. We're playing around with timeframes, and the better security you have on OAuth, the longer your access token can live. So If you use standard OAuth, you're probably going to get a 10-minute to 30-minute token somewhere in there. We'll play around with the time frames. If you are willing to use the most modern OAuth techniques, including the DPoP spec, which is complicated, we can give you much longer lived access tokens. The ability to get a token is now based off public and private key pairs instead of a static username and password credential. And because of all of this, because we have encryption in transit and we have modern short-lived access tokens, then we don't need any IP allow-less at all, which reduces our operational overhead and makes the whole surface area less brittle. So basically, you just call for an access token. Once you get your access token, please cache that for a while, and then you use that for your API calls until the token starts to be about to expire, and then you just go get a new one. So we've talked about this in several of the talks, but really this is not hard at all to set up. You need to create a public and private key pair, and then you need to give us the public key, not the private one. In fact, our UI says if you give us the private key and we paste it in, it won't even let us hit the save button. And then we'll email you back and say, try again, generate a new pair. And so, which has happened. But you give us the public one. There's two different methods here. You can give us a PIM file for just for the public key, and it's static and we put it in there. That works for one or two integrations, but that does not allow you to rotate your keys. If something happened and we needed to rotate the keys, that would entail downtime for your integration because we both have to simultaneously change at the same time. So if you've got a real production level integration, we don't want you to do that. Instead, we want you to host a JWKS URL, which is just a JSON formatted public key. Our server will take your signed JWT and we'll call that URL and see if it validates. And you can have multiple keys in there, and then you can rotate them on your own with zero downtime. So we really prefer you hosting a JWKS URL. Get lots of questions about, hey, I have an on-prem server that's not internet exposed. That JWKS URL is public keys. It's not secret. You can host that in Azure, on GCP, on GoDaddy. We don't really care where. Any public URL, you can put it out there. As long as we can reach it and get a JSON payload back and validate a key, that will work. So that's always our preference. The DevRel team will kind of push you to do that, and that's why, is so that we can constantly allow you to rotate your keys without downtime or having coordination with us. Once you get your key, you're going to create, every time you need an access token, you're going to create your own JWT, and it's a special one. It only has 5 values. The first one is a JTI claim. That's just to prevent replay of your token. So it's just a random value and you'll generate a new one every time you call. The second one is always that URL. It's the audience. That's the token endpoint itself. And so it's always a hard-coded string. The next 2 are the same value. It's a subject and an issuer, and it's always your client ID. So when you register with us, we're going to give you a client ID back. It goes in both of those values. And then the last one is an expiration. We recommend no more than 5 minutes in the future for your expiration. So you're going to make that JWT with those claims, and then you're going to sign it with one of these 3 algorithms, your choice, right? And so you just sign it with one of those 3, has to match your key, of course. And then you will send that signed JWT to our token endpoint, and lo and behold, you'll get an access token back. So what changes when we're talking about a SOAP protocol, because JExchange is SOAP, what changes here? So this is the payload for the traditional JExchange SOAP call with the WSSE security header. So you'll see in the SOAP envelope in the header there, you get all of that username and password. This is already problematic because if you're going to log your JX responses, you got to obfuscate those username and passwords. We shouldn't be logging that. It's a pain in the rear. Again, different time. SOAP was an older protocol. So instead, what we want you to do is once you get your access token, your header can be empty. And now all you have to do is have your body payload, and then with the SOAP message, you just add the OAuth bearer header in there and put your access token in the authorization header, and away you go. And then we will look up all your creds and map it to your existing integration, all from that client ID that's in the OAuth access token. So that's the only really change that you're going to have on the SOAP call. The other one is our new JExchange servers are cloud hosted and they're in an active multi-region posture. So I like to tell people we understand the criticality of JExchange. And in fact, I tell people, hey, if JExchange is down, Jack Henry is down, right? We understand the impact that has. So the new cloud hosted servers are active multi-region. So even if our cloud provider has an incident in one region, traffic can all be routed to the other region seamlessly, and they have redundant network paths to our data center. So it's a much more reliable setup. Okay, so those were the SOAP APIs, JExchange. We also have JExchange REST and the digital toolkit and the platform APIs and a whole litany of other, including some of our payments APIs. All of our REST APIs were predominantly using OAuth 2 already. So the only change those APIs are going to see is how you get your access token. So instead of using a client ID and secret, which by the way, in case you don't know, is just a synonym for username and password, we're going to switch those to using the private key JWT method. So to be that same, you give us the public key, sign the assertion, turn it in, and that's how you'll get your access token. That's the only change to our REST APIs that are using OAuth 2. So if you're using JExchange REST or some of the payments APIs or anything along those lines, even some of the old EES, which are JXR endpoints, those will all be changing to use the private key JWT. But in all other cases, the APIs remain the same. So what kind of timeline do we have here? So we fully understand the impact of making a breaking API change, especially to an API as broad and as old as JExchange. But in this case, we have to do it. So we announced last May that starting this May, we will not set up new configurations on the username and password versions for JExchange. If you've got an existing config, it's fine for now, but if you're onboarding new customers or new integrations, we won't set them up with username and password. We'll only set them up on OAuth starting this May. So if you're using JExchange and haven't started development on OAuth 2, now is the time because your project's going to start hitting delays if you don't. So this May, OAuth 2 for new configs only. Our other APIs, JExchange kind of went first, but our other APIs like the REST ones, those new config options will switch to only the public-private key method of OAuth 2, the private key JWT auth method, in November of this calendar year. So you got a little bit more time. It's also a smaller change. But that's coming in November. So if you're using those APIs, you need to start working on development on that. JExchange has a 3-year deprecation policy. So that means we will fully deprecate the username and password methodologies for calling JExchange in May of 2028. You have 2 more years. But by that time, all integrations, and it's a big lift, all integrations need to move to the cloud-hosted servers using OAuth 2 instead of username and password. And then in November of 2028, all the other APIs will all be fully on OAuth 2 with the private key JWT auth method as well. So got a set of time frames that we're moving through. We're going to communicate and continue to communicate on this regularly and repeatedly. We'll probably annoy the heck out of you. What we don't want to do is come to a day where someone goes, I didn't know this was switching. Which is going to happen no matter what we say, but we are going to be pushing you pretty hard to start moving to here. But the operational overhead from having to maintain those IP whitelists and the improved security should make this really, hopefully it's very obvious why we were wanting everyone to switch to this. And also the reliability improvements of our new cloud-hosted servers are quite substantial. So we really would like to get everyone moved over there. So thank you all. I think I'm going to have Jaime come back.
All right. So we are rolling right into lunch today. So this is your lunch break. It is a little bit shorter than the other day. So bear in mind, we are coming back right on the dot at 1 p.m. to talk about Data Hub. So food is over in the room like it was before, and we'll see you in a bit.